four of us together into a conversation. We've actually never talked about this before, so it's going to be a great time together. Just want to start over, and Stephen, why don't you introduce yourself, and we'll go just right across.
Okay. So I'm Stephen Moore and teach in the English department. So I'm a professor over there in the Department of Language and Literature, and American literature, African American literature, contemporary American poetry, and so those are the classes I love to teach.
Tell us a little bit. You also know an individual named Theodore Thumbs.
Oh, that's right.
Tell us about that.
So Theodore Thumbs is a children's book that I wrote about a year ago now, and it's just about a little boy who he has this gregarious personality, is a nice kid, but people pick on him all the time. I don't know why I'm looking at you while I'm saying that, but you're not a bully at all. But kids in his community, at his school, at church, they pick on him, they bully him, and so that's what the book is about. And it talks about how to overcome bullying in our world.
He was looking at this next person who is a Stephen because he was a nice little kid, and perhaps people picked on you. I don't know.
Not too bad.
Not too bad.
I'm Stephen Baldridge. I teach in the School of Social Work here, primarily undergrad. I direct the undergraduate program. I think maybe the reason I was wrangled into this, I worked in public schools for the majority of my career as a behavior specialist, mainly with special ed kiddos. And I did quite a bit of consulting with teachers and educators, and bullying was a frequent topic that we talked about. Also do some research in social media and some different aspects of technology and interactions that go along those lines. So.
And is this on? Can you hear me? I'm Jennifer Shewmaker. I'm a psychology professor, and one of the things I like to study when I work with children and adolescents is media, and especially some focuses on social media and how social media has become a way of building and maintaining relationships, but also a way of sometimes tearing down relationships, and an identity builder, but also sometimes an identity abuser. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I'm here today, is kind of talk about children and adolescents and how bullying can play a part in their identity as well.
And I'm Joey Cope. For the last 17 years, I've led the Duncombe Center for Conflict Resolution, now Duncombe Center Solutions, although I'm not doing that anymore. I'm the interim dean of the College of Graduate and Professional Studies in Dallas now, but still have worked quite a bit in this area of conflict management and bullying. So as we start this afternoon, because we do look at this from a variety of perspectives, it would be good for us to get a rounded view of what bullying is and how the different disciplines approach bullying. So I'd throw that open to the group.
Well, they were making fun of me because I brought a written definition that I wanted to share, so I'll start with that. But I'm a school psychologist, which means before I came to ACU, I worked in the public school system. And when we're working with bullying in the school, there's a way that we usually define that, and so I was going to share that with you. This is what we call bullying is unwanted, repetitive, and aggressive behavior marked by an imbalance of power. And this can take on different forms, so it might be physical, it might be verbal, it could be relational, and it could be either in person, face-to-face, or electronic, which brings in that social media piece. But I thought that was interesting because if somebody is just mean to somebody one time in the school system, we wouldn't call that bullying. Now, they still might get in trouble for it, but this kind of repetitive behavior is something we would be looking for, and that imbalance of power. So one person must have some kind of power over the other, and that could be social power. It could be physical power. It could be that they have some kind of authority. So that's the definition that we use, at least in the field of school psychology, when we're talking about bullying.
Great.
Yeah, I think that's a great definition. And the only thing I would add to it, especially when I'm teaching literature to my students, because we read quite a bit of poetry, short stories, novels, and most of those stories, they deal with deal with exactly what you just said. The definition is definitely in action when you're reading the story. And also when I'm teaching those books, I like to bring in scenes from, there's a show that my students were talking about here recently called 13 Reasons Why, and it's based on a novel, but it's on Netflix, and it's about bullying. And so there are movies, there are TV shows, even videos. I'm glad he was playing that Michael Jackson song. The video, if you watch the long version of that video, it's about a boy growing up in a ghetto, and he's constantly bullied at school. But what I find troubling is that it's not only taking place in public schools or private schools, but at colleges and universities, and even in the workplace. I think that's what's troubling for me. So we can see it everywhere that we go. And even in churches, we see bullying taking place. So someone exerting power over another individual. So I love that definition.
I'm not going to be very original here. I think the word power is very important. Even before Jennifer read that, I thought of the word power. I think that's something that when you really think about bullying, I think when I specifically was working with kiddos that had been bullied, what we would kind of consider would be kind of a constant harassment, or, I mean, definitely unwelcome, but a constant harassment or making someone feel powerless based on a difference or that thought of othering. So that's all I guess I would add.
Yeah, I think too, as we look at bullying, my area would be more workplace and church related type things. You see an individual who targets someone else for a specific reason. It's not necessarily because they dislike them. Oftentimes they target them because they don't like what they stand for. It's an attractive person. It's a popular person. Unfortunately, what we see in schools a lot and in the workplace is they'll target people who are kind because they don't believe that they'll fight back. And so they'll target them, but I'm using the word target specifically and not victim. You don't have to be a victim to bullying, but a lot of that depends on the people around you. But you can be targeted, and what a bully will often do in a workplace situation, in any organization type thing, is it's almost like watching one of the National Geographic specials. You watch the lions, gather around the water buffalo, and they look for the old or the lame, and they separate them out. And it's not because they're necessarily old or lame when you were talking about bullying, but because it's someone they can believe they can successfully target. And so we have a person not only who's looking for power, but it's very intentional in the way that they direct their efforts and their behavior in order to impact others. So with that, Stephen had brought up some statistics that are out there, and we'd like to just kind of talk around those a little bit. Statistics show that about 4,000 people young people a year, lose their lives to some sort of bullying related incident. How does that impact the way that you look at bullying and the way that we ought to be thinking about it as a group?
Well, from a psychological perspective, one of the things that we always think about is bullying is harmful, not just to the person who's being bullied, but to the person who's doing the bullying. Especially because I work with children and adolescents, I don't want this person to grow up thinking that's a successful or healthy way to treat others. And so it's startling and sad to think that people lose their lives to that, but it does, wake you up to say, we can't say, oh, that's just how kids are. That's not how people should treat each other. And I think that's the thing we have to remember is just because behavior can be normative, which means we've seen it before, doesn't mean it's okay or healthy or a successful way to interact with other people. And so that kind of statistic really gets your attention and makes you think, I've got to do something to help change this.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. No, I think having that statistic sheds light on the fact that kind of what Jennifer was saying is I've seen it written off a lot of times by parents or by other people saying, well, this is how I grew up. I turned out okay. The snowflakes just need to toughen up. Those sorts of comments kind of make me insane, because it is damaging. It is hurting, like literally physically hurting people. And so just to kind of write it off and saying they just need to toughen up, back in the day, that's what we did. We just shook it off, or we dealt with it ourselves. I think it's a little antiquated. I think it's not, like Jennifer saying, not a healthy way to deal with something. And just because a few of us have survived it and come out okay on the other side doesn't mean it's something that we need to turn a blind eye to.
Yeah. And it's definitely, I don't know, just reading that stat, and I've been doing some research on this topic, because when I go and talk about Theodore Thumbs or read the book, and then they want me to explain, okay, why did you write the book, and do we have a serious problem with bullying in our country and in our world? And I don't know, when I read those stats, it's not just that stat, but they're just all these facts and figures that are just mind-boggling. I cannot believe that this is going on in our country and in our world. And I think something has got to be done about it. And it's very tragic for me when I hear about all these lives being lost. And I think you're exactly right in terms of our kids. They're being bullied, but what got to me is this kid is in Ohio. You'll probably hear about it on the news. And he's in elementary school, and he wore ties all the time, and he was bullied. He was picked on. But there are so many of these stories of kids being picked on and then ending their lives because he went to his house and used a tie to kill himself. And we're talking about somebody in elementary school. And so, I don't know, I think it's an epidemic that we have in our hands, and we need to talk openly and boldly about it. And then the whole stat about the workplace, 64%, I believe, of adults report being bullied in the workplace. So I don't know, you can just read one stat after the other and just, you don't know what to do with that.
There are other statistics that say that workplace bullying takes place 1,600 times more than any type of workplace violence. So it's almost constant in our workplaces as we see that. Why are we seeing, or why are we just more sensitive to this, or why are we seeing the upturn in this?
Perhaps we're more sensitive to it. I think we have a name for it. But I think a lot of it has to do, it's easy to blame things on technology. I tend to try not to do that, but I think just in the nature of the way things are now is we have constant access to complete strangers and the ability to demean them and argue with them with little to no repercussion. We see somebody that has a different opinion than ours, stands for something different than we do, is different from us in some way, and we're able to say something to them directly, without ever having a relationship with them, without ever having to see them face to face, without really ever seeing the consequences to that. And I do think that blends over into some of our face to face interactions, and it's just the whole attitude. I think the attitude is pervasive a little bit, where it's just kind of spreading a little bit. And so I think, we are a little more sensitive to it, or a lot more sensitive to it. But because of the different ways we interact with one another now, I think it just gives us different avenues to do some of this stuff.
Yeah, and I definitely think social media, and that's definitely what your book is all about. I don't know if you bought copies for us to put her on the spot. But anyways, no, her book talks about this subject. So I definitely think social media plays a role, but I also think, I don't know if we should talk about it now or, no, I'm just playing, but politics. What we're seeing in politics. I remember, do you all remember the election that took place? Okay, I don't know if you remember the election season. It was on my birthday, by the way. The election?
I knew there was a reason to celebrate something, yeah.
November the 8th, that's right. But I remember when Hillary Clinton got up during her convention speech. I don't know if you watched it or not, but she got up during her convention speech and she said that I was being bullied, I was being picked on, and I was crying out to my mom for help, and she pushed me back out of the door. She says, get out there and learn how to fight your own battles. I mean, that was the message that was the people were receiving from that speech. And I find that troubling, but I think it's being modeled for us when you look in the world of politics, when you look into the business world. when you go from one arena to the next, I think people are seeing it being played out, and it's almost as if we are signing off on it. And I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, I think what's being modeled for us at the highest level of government is frightening, and our kids are picking up on it, and adults are picking up as well. And I think when I was growing up, you're taught it's all about making it to the top. And if you have to bully and beat somebody up and get them out of your way, it's all about that. So it's modeled for us, and it's reinforced on a daily basis. So I think that's the problem in my mind.
That makes me think about, Stephen is my literary agent. He's always trying to get me to talk about my book more. But one of the things I do study and write about is media, and there is this culture of argument and sort of elevation of conversations. And so instead of, when we disagree, if we were on a television show and we didn't agree on something, we would be screaming at each other and calling each other's names, and because that's what gets the ratings, you know. And so that concerns me, this place that media plays in ramping up the emotions of disagreement, because there, as you know, with conflict resolution, there are ways to disagree with one another and say, I think that's wrong, without calling you names and denigrating you and screaming at you. And yet we see that. So if we're watching television talk shows, we're going to see that. If we're listening to radio shows, we're going to hear that. And it's not just us as adults, it's our kids too, seeing that coming up. And so then you don't have this culture of civil disagreement, I'll call it. You know, there's so much incivility. And I think that's huge in whatever your arena you're talking about, whether that's politics or, I don't even know, all kinds of shows where The Bachelor, where people are fighting, you know, over some guy they don't even know. You know, I mean, these kinds of things ramp up the drama because they get ratings in response, but emotionally and spiritually, those are bad for us. They're damaging and they're hurtful.
So as we look at this, I mean, one of the things that we did discuss was, you know, how do we as Christians impact a world of bullies? Now, that sounds like everybody else is a bully. The truth is, as Jennifer was saying, there are people who misbehave, and there are people who act from selfishness who aren't bullies. They just simply act that way from time to time. We all do that to some extent. But a bully, one of the things that came out in the definition, it's repeated behavior, and it's repeated because they're successful with it. And so as a society, we are charged with looking at ways to move off of that behavior. Unfortunately, I spoke to the Municipal League of something or other here in Texas. I usually don't even read the program before I go in because I've got the same speech. But I was going in and I was presenting on bullying, and I got to a point, and I mentioned as Stephen Baldridge did, that, you know, it's a form of harassment. It's not always actionable, but from a legal standpoint, but it is a form of harassment. And a couple of the city managers who were sitting in the room just started shaking their heads, saying, you know, oh, you're just taking us down the wrong road. You know, that it's one of those deals where, you know, you just need to get a stiff upper lip and go forward and deal with it. That's just real life. What is real life is the fact that a good number of people in the workplace, at least, have some sort of issue of identity issue, self-value, and they're using the bullying to put themselves up above somebody else. With kids, I'm not sure exactly at what level that comes out, but this idea of self-identity. So there is a way to address bullies to actually help them, which is to address these underlying needs. Have any of you seen any of that in the work that you've done, or your own personal experience? And they say no at this point. It's conversation. You're supposed to say something.
Well, I think when we see children bullying, what we're usually seeing is that they're lacking a sense of power or control in some other area of their life. So maybe at home they're getting abused or bullied, or maybe they're seeing that modeled as this is how you treat people. And so they're looking to gain power by treating other people in that way. And that's how they know how to look for social power, instead of saying, how can I help others? How can I connect with people in a healthy way? They've been taught, or they've just learned from experience, that the only way that they figured out how to do it is by putting other people down.
Okay, so Stephen Moore, WWTD, what would Theodore Thumbs do?
That's good. Okay.
You like that?
I like that. What would Theodore do? Well, I'm working on writing more books in the series, but I haven't answered that question yet in the book series, but I hope to. But I don't know, with Theodore, he tries to get help from his parents in order to combat bullying. But I think the bullies in the book, I agree with you, that there's something that they're wrestling with, and I plan to write about that, where, of course, we're learning more about the one who's bullied, and in the next book I'm going to talk more about the bully and why does the bully do it. And in some of the cases I've read and studied, and even that novel that I mentioned to you all, the TV show that was just a huge phenomenal hit this summer, 13 Reasons Why, they offered reasons for this football player to be this, spoiler alert, I don't want to ruin it, should I say spoiler? But there's just, I think the author does a good job in showing how he's this football player and it's all about domination. It's all about making it to the top, and it spills over in other arenas in life. And I think that's why it's such an incredible work of art, because it's visually showing us how it all happens. And so I don't know. Again, I love what Noam Chomsky says about power. We're taught at a young age, it's all about making it to the top. And so if we are in a culture that feeds this to us on a daily basis, it makes sense to me that we're going to see negative behaviors. This is why I think it's interesting to talk about Britain. The Prince William said that half of the population, or half of the young people, they die because of bullying, and he's making it he's trying to create an awareness for everyone to do something about it. See, I don't think we're serious, in the United States, I don't think we're serious about addressing it, because it's part of our cultural identity. It's all about domination. It's all about making it to the top. And so I don't know. I don't know what to do. But to go back to your question about Theodore Thumbs, I'm just hoping later on in the book series, I'm going to try to show how we've got to do something about it. And I'm talking about the adults in the book have to do something about this epidemic, because I think the adults are looking the other way. I was at a school system here recently in Austin and talking to some of the school leaders there, and they were telling me, well, it's just part of growing up, like what you were saying. And this person, I mean, they're in positions of power, and they're telling me this. It's just part of growing up. I was bullied as a kid, and look at me. I'm a tough person. I'm a good person now. And I'm just like, wow. I thought it'd be easy to talk about bullying in that environment to some of the teachers and to some of the leaders, but I found that troubling.
Yeah. So what do we do? What steps do we take? Going back into what business and organizations do, they address it through programs. But one of the things is that the rest of the organization can't turn their back on the bullying. You have to stand together. We know that when a child is bullied, even on the playground, if one other child will stand with them, it usually makes a difference. That's true in the workplace as well. It's true in churches as well. We see in working with church leaders that often you have very strong individuals leading the churches, but most of them have a good intention about what they're doing, and some of that's misfounded because they think God appointed them, and so they couldn't be wrong at all about anything. But part of it, occasionally you will get a bully in a church situation, and what has to be done in that case is that the good sisters and brothers of that church need to stand up and say, we're not gonna tolerate that. Don't have to be ugly to them, but say that is not something that we're going to work with. We're not going to be ruled through this tyranny of a bully. And so what things could you, how could you equip people to help with bullying?
We, couple different answers here. What we would always do when we would have a kid, because most of the kids that I dealt with in school were special needs. And so whenever we would see, or whenever we had an issue with one of them being bullied, which happened frequently, we would figure out a way to incentivize, might not be reinforce other people for standing up to the bullies on their behalf. Kind of empowering classmates to step in on their behalf of kind of someone who might be powerless. And that could take a lot of different forms. But I think even as adults, I don't think we're above figuring out ways and processes to empower people to stand up for the marginalized or the people who are more powerless. I teach public policy, so I am not one who is opposed to let's formalize some policies to do this. Whether that's in the church, whether that's public policies, whatever it is, I think there are ways that we can encourage people to stand up for other people and discourage people from doing the things that we're talking about.
Yeah, I like that response. And I think if we're talking about the school system, I love what Nick Croissant said. He works with teens and had a chance to talk to him about this topic. He works with teens and elementary kids, and he said that we ought to do whatever we can to bring reconciliation into the arena. And I thought it was very interesting because he said for the kid that's being bullied and the kid that bullies, let's get them together in one room. Let's get their parents. Let's get the teachers involved and share a meal together and share and talk and share life with each other and share their stories with each other. And I thought that was very profound, and try to figure out a way, what can we do about the situation? Because he said that most of the time in schools, you just separate the two, and that's it. And he says, no, this is something that it's going to try to truly bring healing to that situation. But I also think that we've got to, it's very scriptural when it talks about fight for the oppressed, like stand up for the oppressed. I think we need to put it on everyone's radar, especially leaders, and to pay attention and to roll up their sleeves and to do something to help those who are being oppressed. I'm just dumbfounded. I'm just shocked how we turn the other way when someone's being bullied. And even with, if we're going to talk about colleges, universities, you think about pledging that goes on. Well, it happens all the time because people don't want to stand up and say, okay, this is wrong. Rarely will we say, okay, we got to speak up and say that this is wrong what we're doing to this student, and we're oppressing him and we're bullying him. And you all have heard those accounts in the media where individuals are dying because a hazing ritual went too far, and it's because of bullying. So, I don't know.
Well, and so as Christians, I think we are, number one, we believe that we are made in the image of God. Number two, we should believe that everyone else is made in the image of God. And so we are image bearers, and that's not how Jesus treated people. He treated them with love and respect. And of course, when they were doing things wrong, he would call them out and say, hey, that's not right. And so as a Christian, I don't see how you can believe it's okay to treat people with hate and aggression and to bully. And to me also, there's this severe lack of empathy. So what the suggestion you're making of bringing people together, I think sometimes when we have disagreements with one another, if we would really say, Joey, I don't see it that way. Help me understand your point of view. It's not about me trying to teach you to believe what I believe. It's about me understanding, why do you believe what you believe? Because you've walked a different path than I have. And so I think if we would take that perspective and help kids learn and understand that perspective of saying, when we have disagreements with people or we don't like someone for some reason, it's not about winning. This cultural belief in power and winning over other people. It's about coming together. Lexi was in my class last year, so she knows I'm going to talk about connection. But one of the the ways that we can be healthy and thrive is by having healthy connections with people and saying, help me understand. We disagree. You help me understand you, and I'll help you understand me. And we may still disagree. I think that's the key point. We may still not see the same way, but that's okay. And being able to be a place where I see you as in the image of God, how can I treat you then in a way that's purposefully hurtful? I think that's a huge piece.
Yeah, and just tacking onto that, one of the things that we've looked at in conflict management principles is when you have these conversations with people, you're going, why would I want to talk to a bully? I mean, they're not treating me well. Why do I want to understand them? They've got to be wrong. The difference is even in the approach to the questions. If we'll ask questions that come out of curiosity rather than out of judgment, I'm trained as a lawyer, and so I like to cross-examine because I can make you say just about whatever I want you to say. But if I ask curious questions in trial, I'll get in trouble because you'll tell me other things. But in these conversations with people who aren't treating us well, or if we are parents working with others who are working with someone who may be bullying, or even in a church or an organization, if we ask these curious questions, which are the ones that lead to understanding, that will make all the difference. And we need to teach our kids to ask those curious questions as well, instead of the ones that will indict or will send someone into another fit of rage or what other behavior that's there.